Chairman Deloach, will you open some word of prayer? Which one you on there? We're gonna get started. Chairman Deloach, will you lead us in a word of prayer?
Let's pray.
You gotta push your button there.
Oh, yeah.
16.
I'm on now.
Okay.
Let's pray. Heavenly Father, we're truly thankful for an opportunity to serve our fellow man and to serve you. Be with us today, guide us so we may do that to the best of our abilities. Amen.
We're gonna hear the bill as is. You can present them everywhere you want to. We're gonna hear the bill as is with that left in. If you want to make a substitute, you do it tomorrow in full committee. We're gonna hear the bill as is, a hearing only.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Members of the committee, I bring before you LC 520279. This is the Lyft and Uber bill, House HB 529. This is the Uber and Lyft bill we worked on last year, and somehow we didn't get it across the finish line. This year, we've had many parties that have worked together. Up until 2 minutes ago, wanting to make some changes, and we will have that sub implemented by tomorrow, but I'm going to do the bill today as is on direction of the chairman.
You can cover what the sub's going to be if you'd like to, but that's
Okay.
we're just
okay.
going to have a hearing on the bill and hear from anybody that wants to speak to it.
Sounds good. This bill aims to bring the state of Georgia's Transportation Network Company, or TNC, insurance code more in line with the national TNC insurance model. In 2015, the National Council of Insurance Legislators, or NCOIL, brokered a grand compromise between the insurance industry and the TNC industry, resulting in the adoption of an NCOIL model bill for TNC insurance requirements. This model has become the standard across the nation for settling the amounts of insurance TNCs are required to provide. It protects drivers, it protects the public, and it ensures the interest of insurers and the transportation network company are properly addressed. Currently, Georgia's insurance code requires TNCs to provide $1 million in uninsured motorist and underinsured motorist coverage for TNC drivers engaged in the TNC service. We presented this bill in the House last session with the National Council of Insurance Legislators' recommended language. However, in this new piece of legislation, we have gone above and beyond what the national model bill requires. With this new language included in this legislation, TNCs are required to carry uninsured and underinsured coverage of $100,000 per person for bodily injury, $300,000 per accident for bodily injury, and $25,000 per accident for property damage. This in itself, Mr. Chairman, is the meat of the bill, and it's going to help the state of Georgia be in compliance with the rest of the states in the U.S. And with that, I'll defer to any questions. I think we had some folks that wanted to speak to the bill.
This 200, this 100, 300. Is that when they're? That's when they're. Is that when they have somebody in the car with them, or they're not on? What code is that under? Do you know?
Well, it's the TNCs are required to carry uninsured and underinsured coverage of $100 per person for bodily injury, $300,000 per accident for bodily injury, and then $25,000 per accident for property damage.
I believe that's when they have got a call for a pickup, or the
Correct.
pickup is completed.
Correct.
Okay, that's what I want to know. Any other questions from the committee? Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To the author of the bill, is there a mechanism for these limits to be changed when they are no longer in line with the marketplace, or we have to come back and do another bill?
I assume we'd have to come back and do another bill. I think it's been a while since these have changed from where they are currently.
Any other questions from anybody on the committee? Chairman DeLoach.
Let me understand this. I was reading it, and I think this is what it says. This deals with the uninsured and underinsured motorist portion.
Yes.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions from the committee? Is there anybody in the audience that wish to speak to the bill? We have a sign-up sheet, I guess. Would anybody else like to sign up that didn't know the sheet was over there? They're signed up. All right. Okay. Joe Messina, tell us who you are, as I just did, and who you're with.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is Joe Messina. I'm an attorney with Uber on the insurance legal team. Uber appreciates the opportunity to speak before the committee today in support of this bill. We've worked closely with several stakeholders over the past several months, and we think that this represents progress on an issue that's ripe for reform. Currently, Georgia law requires transportation network companies, TNCs, to maintain uninsured and underinsured motorist coverage with limits of $1 million once a ride has been accepted on the application, despite the fact that every other driver in the state of Georgia has the ability to reject that coverage entirely. They're not required to maintain any limits, let alone limits of $1 million. The practical effect of this high limit is that Georgia is the most expensive state in the United States to insure for TNC, Transportation Network Company, activity. That's more than California, New York, New Jersey. And that translates to higher costs for Georgia riders. But aside from the cost component, the bill seeks to revise the $1 million limit requirement because it's proven to be both unnecessary from a claims and loss perspective and just outside the norm when compared to other states in the United States. Just a few more details on each of those points. Due to Uber's size and trip volume, we have a very easy ability to look at losses and claims across the United States, and we're able to see that those $1 million requirements are just not needed. For example, over the past 24 months, only 0.004% of Uber passenger trips have resulted in an uninsured and underinsured motorist coverage claim at all, at any amount. That translates to only 4 UM/UIM claims per 100,000 trips. And in fact, of those 4 per 100,000 trips, 44.6% were resolved without any payment at all, let alone an amount that would necessitate these types of limits. And in fact, when looking at those claims that were paid, it's clear that $1 million is just not needed. Over that same 24-month span, 0.000483% of Uber trips in Georgia resulted in an uninsured claim over $50,000. That translates to less than 1 claim per 100,000 trips, valued at $50,000 or more. Aside from being unnecessary, these limits are just outside the norm. There are only 7 states in the United States that require transportation network companies to maintain $1 million or more of uninsured motorist coverage. That's California, New York, New Jersey, Vermont, Oregon, New Hampshire, and Virginia. Notably, the Virginia legislature just passed a couple of weeks ago a bill out of their legislature reducing their $1 million requirement down to $30,000 per person and $60,000 per accident. And in fact, both North Carolina and Washington last year reduced their $1 million requirement down quite substantially. Just a few quick points about what this bill does not do. It does not change the fact that TNC's, transportation network companies, will still be required to carry $1 million of third-party auto liability insurance on behalf of the driver. That's an amount that's 20 times higher than every other driver in the state. And it likewise doesn't change the fact that the driver doesn't need to do anything to benefit from the insurance that Uber, the transportation network company, is maintaining on behalf of the driver. If the driver is on our app, he or she is insured with the primary policy. So again, we think this bill represents progress on an issue, and we appreciate the opportunity to speak in support of it. Happy to take any questions if there are.
We have any questions from the committee? Representative Hughley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for your presentation. You were talking about other states and their limits. So how do the limits that you're recommending in this bill compare to our neighboring states?
They would still be on the high side. The vast majority of states follow that model that the sponsor was mentioning, and the model says that limits should match whatever is required on a compulsory basis of every other driver in the state. So in Georgia, that would be 0. There are about 25 states or so that do require some level of uninsured motorist coverage. Usually that's in the $50,000 range, $100,000 range. And then there are, of course, those 7 states that I mentioned that require $1 million or more. But these limits would still be on the high side on a comparative basis.
And so we got to 25 in this bill because that's the minimum Georgia.
For property damage
Yeah,
liability.
is that why 25 was chosen?
It is. Property damage liability from an uninsured motorist coverage perspective is actually quite rare in most states. Most states don't require that. They actually only require the bodily injury uninsured motorist coverage, which in this bill are 100, 300.
Uninsured motorists.
I get it. I'm clear.
Is that it? Chairman Deloach.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Do you know if I can stack this coverage with my personal auto? Is my personal auto underinsured motorist going to follow me if they're not ride for hire?
In Georgia, an insured has the ability to select either stackable or unstackable limits. That's up to the transportation
So
network.
in other words, I could select any auto rather than any owned auto on my personal auto coverage, and it would follow me.
That's correct. And so if a driver on the Uber or Lyft platform has their own uninsured motorist coverage that would apply, then that is still there to recover from.
Thank you.
Representative Douglas.
Mr. Chair, I just got a friendly question. Since we're reducing this down from $1 million, is this fee going to trickle down to the rideshare people at all?
Eventually, it will. The idea is that this should reduce the cost of the insurance, which the cost is very closely tied. The cost to purchase the insurance is very closely tied to fares that riders pay, and in fact, the take rate that a driver may have on the app. Now, I can't speak to when that might happen, but the fact is that, like I said, Georgia's the most expensive state to insure, and this is why.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Mr. Messina.
I have one more, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, since you said Georgia's the most expensive for insurance purposes, and that is reflected in the cost for engaging a ride share, so how do we compare to our neighbor in terms of how much more are Georgia citizens paying as a result of this is, I guess, my question.
I can't speak to how much more the average rider pays, but I can say compared to the average cost of this coverage in other states, this is close to 10 times higher.
But you do understand my question. My question is, so what effect will doing this have on the fares that people in Georgia pay? Is what I'm trying to get to.
And I think they will be reduced. I just can't tell you how much they would be reduced.
Okay.
Any further questions? Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Ms. Samples? Tell us who you are and who you're with.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and committee members. I'm Megan Sir-Jane Samples. I'm the head of state and local government affairs for Lyft. I echo my colleagues' remarks and agree that this bill represents progress on the issue of excessive and burdensome mandatory TNC insurance requirements. High-limit UM/UIM is an expensive solution to a problem that does not exist, that drives up costs for consumers. Lyft has similarly been able to analyze claims and loss data that shows that Georgia's 1 million UM/UIM limits are unnecessary. So over 24 months, only 0.004% of Lyft passenger trips in Georgia result in an uninsured or underinsured motorist claim at any value, translating to only 4 UM/UIM claims per 100,000 trips. 35.1% of those UM/UIM claims were resolved without any payment at all, In addition, we determined that during those 24 months, 0.000446% of Lyft trips in Georgia resulted in an uninsured or underinsured motorist claim valued at $50,000 or greater, which translates to less than 0.5 claims per 100,000 trips valued at $50,000 or greater. The inefficiency of the coverage results in significant legal expense that takes money from the pocket of injured parties and puts it into the court system instead. By mandating this excessive coverage, it increases prices for consumers who rely on this service. Lyft's mission is to provide the world's best transportation, and that includes ensuring rideshare is affordable for everyone. And with that, I want to take a couple moments to share some stats from a 2019 Georgia Economic Impact Report that showed that 49% of rides start or end in low-income areas, 75% are less likely to drive substance impaired due to the availability of Lyft, 31% of healthcare riders state that without Lyft, they would be less likely to make it to their appointments regularly, and 50% of riders use Lyft to get to the airport. I also say that to remind you that Lyft, link it to your Delta Sky Miles, so every time you ride in a Lyft, you earn your miles. But in all seriousness, affordable rideshare is associated with decreasing impaired driving incidents. According to studies commissioned by the National Attorneys Association, analyzing the number of DUI charges in Atlanta, there was a 52% decrease in DUI charges in Atlanta after the introduction of rideshare. So with that, I thank you committee members for your time and consideration and ask for your favorable support, and my colleague and I are able to answer any other questions that you might have.
Chairman Loach.
So is your testimony that the Lyft system is infinitely superior to Uber?
I plead the fifth. Yes.
Representative Hughley.
So can Lyft answer the question in terms of what effect is this going to have on the cost that consumers pay? Because you're going to save money, right? That's why you want to do it. And I understand that with the limits are high, if something happens, then the first thing the attorneys do is ask for policy limits. So I get that part. But what is it going to mean to my constituents when they call Lyft 5 months from now as opposed to today?
Similarly, we would say that rates will likely be lowered but as a result of this law passing, but we can't say exactly by how much at this time. We have to renegotiate, our premiums with our insurers, et cetera, and see how it plays out in real life. But we can make the strong assumption that rates will be decreased as a result of this passing.
So do you know how we compare to, say, Tennessee?
In terms of like a cost per ride, I would have to assume that Georgia is significantly higher due to the increased insurance requirements that we have. But I don't have that exact. I can go back to my actuary team and see what kind of data we can pull in terms of like cost per ride. But we do tend to spread it out to make rides affordable in those markets. But I would assume that Georgia is higher than Tennessee.
Okay.
Do either one, do you know what the insurance cost is as a percentage of your cost of doing business? I'm talking about close or.
I don't know the exact percentage, but I know it is the highest cost to us doing business.
Beg pardon, say that again.
I don't know the exact percentage, but it is the highest cost of our ability to do business.
So in the free enterprise system, the rates would go down for the customer more than likely because you're trying to compete. Thank you very much. Any other questions? Oh, excuse me. I'm sorry.
So I can't tell you what percentage of our gross bookings it is. It's 30%.
That's high.
Frankly, it's astronomical.
It is. Thank you, sir. What's the will of the committee as far as sending this to the full committee? They have a motion to recommend.
I move to pass.
Have a motion and a second. All those in favor, say aye. All opposed, same sign.
Well, Mr. Chair.
If you got any other discussion, I was supposed to ask you that. I'm sure I was supposed to ask you about if there's any other discussion.
I was gonna say, if we're gonna make the motion, we'll need to do pass and take out section 2, if that's what we're gonna do. Is that not what we're doing?
Yes, we need to do that. That is correct.
So
Now, we entertain the substitute. Yeah.
Yeah, Yes, sir. We moved them in and just take out section 2 for the substitute if that could be the legal group.
And you're removing all of section 2.
Correct.
Have a first and a second. All in favor, say aye. Opposed, same sign. You're all full committee. Thank you. Meeting adjourned.
Thank you.